Assalamu alaikum. Good afternoon, sisters and brothers. I'm very happy to be here with you today. My name is Ahmed Abuznaid, and I'm coming to you from the United States of America, specifically from Miami, Florida. And I'm here with you. I'm here in the Netherlands talking about the work that we do in the United States of America around social justice and racial justice. In the moment of the Black Lives Matter movement. Maybe some of you have heard the terminology Black Lives Matter. That is the moment that we're in right now in the United States. To give you a bit more clarity on the work I do in the organization I belong to, the Dream Defenders, I'm going to have to explain to you some context. So, in the United States, we have to understand the root of the issues to understand how to solve the issues, right? You don't just look for the immediate reaction of how to solve an issue. You have to understand the root. And so, with the United States of America, we understand that it is a settler colonial nation. What does this mean? It means not only did they want to colonize the resources of this country, this land, but they actively wanted to replace the native population. And so, the United States, the colonizers drove out the Native Americans, took most of their land, massacred most of the Native Americans, and then began to bring Africans over to begin the period of enslavement, the transatlantic slave trade. So we know that in the history of the United States of America, there's been deep-seated racism, deep-seated institutionalized discrimination, ethnic cleansing, and colonialism. That also helps us to understand not only how the United States of America deals with minorities in the United States, but how the United States deals with minorities and other people outside of the United States. So our foreign policy, for instance, has always been done with an Orientalist view. And this Orientalist view is one that dehumanizes people of color or Muslims or foreigners as an exotic type of creature, an exotic type of community to be romanticized, as opposed to being full, equal, and powerful human beings. And so it's no shock that in the United States of America that you see police brutality against African Americans and Latinos, and you also see the droning and the bombing and the destabilization of Muslim, Arab, African, and other countries across the world, South American even. Because again, this is all done with the narrative of settler colonialism, in so much so that the white man's rights in America and the colonial man's rights in America are the most powerful and important rights, and are, of course, they trump any rights of native, indigenous, Muslim, or minority communities. So, for instance, police force. So we talk about police brutality in the United States. Most people do not know that the actual origin of police in the United States comes from slave patrols. So in the days of slavery, slaves would attempt to escape the plantation, to escape the house of the master. And then they would have these groups called slave patrols that would go find the slaves and bring them back to their master. These groups later, as the United States began to formalize itself into a country, into a stabilized nation, these groups actually formed the police forces. So again, I think inherently the root of where police forces were developed in the United States came from one of racism and implicit bias towards minority communities, Black people, Latino people, Muslim people. I want to explain a bit implicit bias because it may have been something that's a bit new. So as people, we all have biases, we have prejudices, and sometimes they're implicit and we don't realize it. And so, for instance, in the United States of America, anytime an American sees the word terrorism on television, it's usually associated with Islam, it's usually associated with Muslim people, it's usually associated with Arab. And so we understand that people subconsciously, when they start to think of terrorism, then associate those words with Muslims and Arabs and those communities, because that has been indoctrinated in their mind. So we know that implicit biases work, and you also have these institutionalized forms of discrimination. Please, if I could get a chance to get some feedback from you all, if you could raise your hand if you've heard the name Trayvon Martin. Okay. Nobody's heard. It seems only a couple of people have heard the name Trayvon Martin, right? Doesn't ring a bell. Okay. See, that was a very big moment for us in the United States. And some of you have heard Black Lives Matter, but Black Lives Matter actually erupted out of this movement for a boy named Trayvon Martin. Trayvon Martin was a young black boy, I believe 15 or 16 years old, was visiting his father in a more rural or more country side of the United States of America in a city called Sanford, Florida. And in this neighborhood where his father lived, there was also a community watch program. So a community watch program is a civilian group that decides to monitor the neighborhood, drive around to make sure there's no crime. So they're not police, they're not official police officers, but they do maybe serve in a role of a police officer. And George Zimmerman was the community watch person for this community in Sanford. And he saw Trayvon Martin, and he saw a black kid, so dark skin. He saw someone that he thought did not belong in this neighborhood, and he followed him. But, you know, if you could take a step back and again think about this circumstance, you have a young boy walking in a neighborhood to his father's home, and then you have a white male, looking at this young black boy and figuring that he does not belong. And he only figured that this kid did not belong because of the color of his skin. You know, maybe he thought this neighborhood doesn't, you know, whatever he thought in his assumptions and his ignorance, he thought Trayvon did not belong. So he went to confront Trayvon. Trayvon was, of course, scared, as a young boy would be scared. He says, I'm going to my father's house. They get into an altercation. They get into a fight. At the end of this fight, George Zimmerman shoots and kills Trayvon Martin. Trayvon Martin, again, was a young black boy, had no weapons, had no guns, had no knives, was walking in his father's neighborhood to his father's home, was followed by a community watch person because of the color of his skin, and eventually lost his life. So many of us from across the state of Florida decided we had to do something about this. We had to do something about it because we were fed up. We were, we had had enough of a system in the United States that tells black people, that tells Muslims, that tells Latino people, that tells undocumented people that they don't belong. We had enough of this system and we wanted to do something about it. So we started a group called the Dream Defenders, which has membership aged, let's say, 13 till 35. And it primarily is youth of color, so black, brown, Latino, Muslim, Arab, Asian, people of color who feel disenfranchised by the system, by the majority system that we have in the United States of America. And, you know, it's important to do this work because many times think that in the United States of America, we're all free and we're all millionaires and we all live this lavish lifestyle of materialism. But there's actually a large population of Americans who are in poverty. There's a large population of Americans who cannot vote. They legally cannot vote, even though America paints itself as this powerful democracy of welcoming others. In the United States of America, we have the largest prison population in the entire world. So again, while we brag that we have these freedoms and we have achieved so many things for our people, we actually have more prisoners in our country than, you know, any country in the world, and in fact more than maybe the next 6 or 7 countries combined. So while we as Americans judge North Korea and we judge Syria and we judge Iraq or whatever, all these countries we judge, we actually do worse things to our people than many of these countries in many ways. We also, again, we drone, we destabilize, we bomb, and we occupy countries all over the world. So, you know, it works much better to control a population like this when they lack the fundamental education, the tools, and the skills necessary to combat it. So that's why Dream Defenders came into existence, because we wanted to create a space where young people who were fed up, who saw all of the ills in the United States, both here and abroad, could come together and organize and work and voice our opinions on these subjects to hopefully begin a shift. So I think also maybe you'd be interested to find out how this relates to the work on Palestine and Palestine. So as a Palestinian American, I was born in East Jerusalem, Al-Quds, and in the United States of America, I began to see parallels from my experience in Palestine to the things I've seen in the US. So let me explain a bit about why those parallels exist. Israel, just like the United States of America, is a settler colonial state. So these people not only wanted to take the resources of the land and the oil and the water and the lavish coastline, but they wanted to replace the native indigenous Palestinian population with the Zionist population that would create the Israeli state. So we understand that because of this root and how the state was created and the purpose of the creation of the state of Israel, we understand why Palestinians continue to feel disenfranchised, continue to be ethnically cleansed, demolished homes, settlements expanding, bombings on Gaza every year. We see children imprisoned. We see people being assassinated and then accused of being criminals. So we understand that this comes from a place of discrimination and ethnic cleansing and settler colonialism. So for that purpose, I decided to make the connection for many of our people engaged in the struggle in the U.S., and I would lead delegations from the U.S. to Palestine. And this was important because people in the U.S., they read about things sometimes, and they think they understand what happens on the ground in Palestine. But until they go see it, it's a completely different story. So what we did was we would take these Black American organizers and activists from the U.S. and we would go to Palestine and take them all around. We took them to the Afro-Palestinian community in East Jerusalem because it's important for them to understand that as a Palestinian, we're not just in one shade of color. You know, there's not just a fair-skinned Palestinian engaged in justice against the Zionist occupation. It is darker-skinned and black-skinned Palestinians who had immigrated from Africa some time ago, but they're Palestinians. They're Palestinians with us. They're engaged in the struggle. They are our people. We met with them. We met with Palestinians in Haifa and Akka. We met with Palestinian political prisoners in Ramallah with an organization called Adamir. And this is important because, again, looking at the connection, if you look at the Black Panther movement in the 70s in the United States of America, many of these leaders were imprisoned, tortured, and even till this day, many of them are in prison. Similarly, with the resistance movement in Palestine, you will find that many of our people have been locked up for years, decades, tortured, and many of them are still in prison. They also got a chance to see apartheid in its truest sense in Al-Khalil, in Hebron, the West Bank, because in the West Bank, you will see at the top of the hills lavish, beautiful settlements, Israeli settlements that look like American neighborhoods. They have very new Western type construction and architecture. They all have beautiful swimming pools with plenty of water and trees. And then they also have military guards surrounding the entire settlement. And then you have Jewish-only, settler-only roads that lead to those settlements, so they're effectively blocked off from any of the other population. And at the bottom, you have Palestinian villages that are being demolished, that get limited water supplies, that have limited movement. And of course, you have the apartheid wall in addition. So you have an extremely large wall, greater than the Berlin Wall, the wall that the West claims to have knocked down for justice. They have a wall greater than that, separating Palestinians from their land there. And one of the most important things was for our delegates to go to the Ibrahimi Mosque in Al-Khalil, because not only of the significance of this mosque for those who are Muslim and for those who are people of faith, but because of the historic nature of this location. So in the Ibrahimi Mosque in 1994, there was an Israeli settler from Brooklyn, New York. His last name is Goldstein. He walked into the masjid while 40 Palestinians or so were kneeling in prayer, the salah, and he opened fire and murdered 30 plus Palestinians and injured 150 others. Now, since that terrorist attack on our people in the place of worship, in the masjid, the Israelis have effectively taken 70% of the mosque and created a synagogue. They've also limited the ability of Muslims to access those areas by blocking off the roads to become only Jewish roads, and one of the roads is called Shara Shuhada Street. No Muslims or Palestinians, Arabs are allowed to walk down this road, and it actually blocks off community members from the road. So people who live in the community surrounding this road have to travel all the way around a number of kilometers in order to get to the main road, because they can't, again, travel directly through this pass of Shuhada Street. So the delegates got to see this instance of intense apartheid, and then at the end, when we went back to the United States, you could see that the delegates had a transformative experience. It was something that for the rest of their lives they would look back to, and they began to advocate for Palestinian liberation. So now you see, for instance, in the last 2 years in the United States, in Ferguson, the Black Lives Matter movement has stood with Palestine. In Baltimore, they have stood with Palestine. In New York and many other cities, because people are beginning to make the connections. And this is the note I'll try to bring to a point, and then we'll start getting into a discussion. But I think the question at hand for us is, what type of society do we want to see in the future? There are a lot of people in this world who seek to continue to divide us. So they'll tell you, because you're Muslim, you have to live over here and you cannot talk to this person. And because you're Israeli or Jewish, you can live here, but no one else can live here. Or because you're white and Christian, you don't want these black people in your community. So we have people in this world who are telling us that the way forward is to segregate ourselves and to divide ourselves and to differentiate ourselves from others. And then we have my perspective and the people of the perspective of the movement for racial justice and social justice across the world, that is saying that we can recognize our differences, we can respect our differences, while also embracing a vision for a society that brings us all together. And so, similarly to the United States, as I would wish for in Palestine, I hope for a day where Black Americans could stand next to white Americans and truly feel liberated in this country of the United States of America. And I wish for a day where Palestinians and Jews in the Holy Land of Palestine could live together in harmony. And also, many don't understand that there's a large majority of Palestinians who are Christians too, and people forget they exist. And so for Palestinians, the vision has always been about liberation for all people in our homeland, for all religions, because we view it as essential to liberating our humanity, right? We cannot truly embrace our humanity if we continue to isolate ourselves because of the way people look or think or what they believe in. So I think we're in this very special moment right now in the United States of America, in Palestine and across the world, where we have a choice before us. What type of society will we fight for? What type of society do we envision? And inshallah, I believe that we can win, our vision can win, a vision that can welcome all people and fight for justice on all people. And I'm hopeful of that, but we need more people. So hopefully there are people here in this community and in this center and in this area of Rotterdam and in the Netherlands that want to engage in the same fight for justice, for equality, and for liberation for all. So I've been speaking for maybe 20 or so minutes. I think that's a good place for me to stop. I hope you have a good perspective on the work I do, but this is maybe also a good time for question, answer, and also dialogue. Thank you for your time. I'm happy to be here with you today.